Welcome back, Top Fivers, to another episode. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about 1983, that year in music. Excited to have you with us. And of course, if you like the show, like the channel, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the alert button. And as always, welcome my beautiful co host, Miss Shauna Stevens. Shauna, good morning, afternoon.
Oh,
how's, every, how's everything going?
going well. Ready to celebrate a 40th year anniversary of some of my favorite albums of all time.
Isn't that crazy? 40 years.
Crazy.
Yes. Well, the nice thing about it, at least we weren't, in college when this when this came out. This was this was last half of freshman year. This was wow. Yeah, 1983. It seems so long ago, but it's like I can remember everything about it. It seems like.
Yeah, last half of freshman year, going in as sophomores, at the end of
Yes.
83. And I remember distinctly being hit with so much great music. It's really, I have poured over these albums, and it's been really difficult to narrow it down to what my top five are. So I have to sneak in six. Sorry, not sorry.
Well, that is the thing about talking about top five albums is how many singles were that weren't necessarily released that on an album that year, or that were just kind of one-offs. They're just song after song came out this year that just set it apart. And so yeah, it was really. And as we spoke pre-show, there are songs here that I didn't know came out in 1983, albums I didn't know came out in 93, because I didn't really experience the music until 84, 85, and
Sure.
such as that. And even so, it really is a phenomenal year in music. It was a little overwhelming trying to figure it all out. So, all right. So I actually have, I think I'd probably stop with my top five most influential albums for me
Okay.
personally. Not just what I think are the top five, but just the top five most influential. And I'm going to surprise you probably a little bit, because my number five for me that I picked is "Let's Dance" by David Bowie.
Whoa! That actually happens to be my number five as well.
Really? That's
Yeah.
funny. That's not surprising, I guess, though.
Wait.
Um,
I apologize. I misspoke. I didn't have my glasses on. Actually, it's my number three.
well, that doesn't surprise me either. What a interesting. So for me, there's 70s Bowie, and then there's this, and for the most part, don't care a lot about 70s Bowie. Major Tom, awesome, and there's a few other songs in there that obviously the greatness of David Bowie, his artistry was phenomenal. But for
Yeah.
me, just didn't register with me until "Let's Dance" came out,
Okay.
and then of course, even though we didn't have MTV, you couldn't get away from China Girl, and you couldn't get away from "Let's Dance."
That's right.
But the song that I always listen to every time it comes up on my Sirius XM and makes me bounce in my seat every time it comes on is "Modern Love."
I
I
love
love this song. It's
that album had three major hits on it.
yeah,
China Girl was actually an Iggy Pop song.
sure.
And I don't know if you're aware of this, but can you tell me who the lead guitarist is on this album that was featured?
Actually, I have no idea.
Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Oh, I think memory jingles that a little bit. Okay, that makes sense. I
Is
think I
that
did.
cool? This was David's first album that on EMI Records. I mean, he had just left RCA. He was looking for a more commercial sound. So you know who he hired to help co-produce it?
Hmm.
Chic's Nile Rodgers.
It
And you know what? It did the trick, did it not?
did. Sometimes you need somebody else to tell you what your sound should be, not what you want it, what you think it is, or what you want it to be. And that happens a lot with good artists. Um, I remember here reading a thing recently on Linkin Park, where Linkin Park was actually their interview. They were talking, and they said they brought in producers from completely different genres because they didn't want their album to sound like the last album. And so, what do we need to do here? And I think that's a pretty smart move, obviously on Bowie's part. That really paid off because it put his a stamp of popular authenticity on him. He wasn't just a counterculture guy. Now he's David freaking Bowie.
Yes. Yes.
Great, yeah, beautiful album. And the interesting thing is Stevie Ray Vaughan's biggest album came out this year too. Later on in the year, when
Oh,
he really came onto the scene. Obviously, he was been in the background for years, and everybody knew who he was. But
right.
even he had a great album come out that this year. So yeah, so that was my number five. My number four, and this is not in particular order, but close. "Lick It Up" by Kiss.
Oh, yeah.
It's for me, once again, it tied into a band that I didn't have a true appreciation from in the '70s, which was their height of their career. They was ruling the world there for a few years, or everything was
Was
Kiss
it the
Army.
first album that they shed the makeup?
Correct. They took off and they needed they needed to do something to kickstart their careers again because they had died off. So they took off the makeup,
Yeah.
and you realize just how not handsome these guys actually were and hairy. But they came,
Paul Stanley was hot.
he was kind of cute, I guess. Gene and Gene in his own way, but
Uh,
the hiding behind the persona, that makeup made a difference, right? Here they had the guts to strip it
yeah.
off, and that had to be a huge thing for them. But
Right.
strip it off, and they came out with what it was then a stripped down album,
Yeah.
which was fantastic. I that was my beginning a love affair with Kiss, so to speak, because the '80s Kiss for me is far more important than '70s Kiss, even though most Kiss fans I think would disagree. So number three for me, 90125. Yes. Of course you have it. Yes, the amazing thing for me is that it's not exactly progressive rock isn't exactly my wheelhouse. I don't, they're not that
It's
wasn't,
prog rock.
but yeah, I mean, I do like a lot of prog rock, but it's not something I seek out. But they
Right.
took prog rock and made it mainstream with this album.
Yes.
You
And
know,
well, and I had to say this is on number 4 on my list.
sure. But "It Can Happen" is one of my favorite songs.
Yes.
A brilliant song. "Changes." I was going through the track. I was listening to all this music this morning, going through it all, and it's just it once again we talked about before. All this stuff. It's the soundtrack of our life. You can't,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, it's markers in time.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
my wife and I were just go
One of
ahead.
my things about that album is that they wanted, once again, they wanted to switch genres. And I think, we had talked about this pre-show, is that, you know, there were so many defining albums that came out in 1982, and it
Right.
was waking up this movement of these rockers and these prog rockers that were like, you know what, all these other guys could be mainstream. I mean, Michael Jackson, with Thriller, and all these other guys. So let's change our sound. Let's evolve a little bit. Let's stretch our limits of our wheelhouse. And so what I loved about this album is that it's produced by former member of Yes and founding member of the Buggles, Trevor Horn.
Mm,
And we all know the Buggles from
sure.
MTV fame. That was the very
Right.
first video that MTV aired on their network.
Right. Radio for the
And it
music.
did. This album, it took them from prog rock into more of a pop sound. And I'm with you. I mean, I actually own 2 copies of this album. I couldn't. Well, I didn't realize that I had 2 copies, but and one copy doesn't sound like quite as perfect as the other one. So I'm glad to own 2. Owner of a Lonely Heart.
Oh, beautiful song.
I mean, and I have wore this tape out. I don't even know how many times. And right now, you know, so my albums and how I listed mine are albums that I've bought in multiple media forms. So
Sure.
I've got a CD, I've got tapes of all of these. So go ahead. I know what
I
you.
was so the interesting thing about that also, which surprised me, and I guess from watching The Wedding Singer, I guess I knew this, but CDs was released in the United States for the first time in this year. The first
Yeah,
CDs were in 1983, and I didn't see a CD till probably 88. It seemed like in my mind, anyways. Just everything was still records and mostly cassettes. So, and then for me, always leaning towards the heavier guitar driven music. Shout of the Devil, Motley Crue.
okay.
Uh, Not only was it uh, a landmark album for that LA scene genre of metal music, obviously Quiet Riot Metal Health came out and preceded it, and also in their own right a very important album. They were the first LA band to be signed to a major record deal,
Yeah.
but Motley Crue just came over and swallowed the whole genre. They were already the kind of the kings of the pit. For some reason, they didn't get signed first. They wouldn't sign, I guess, what it was. But find a bad song on that album. It is by far, in my opinion, their best album, and it is a great. And their worst song, in my opinion, on that album is the Beatles cover the Marilyn Manson song
Helter Skelter.
Helter Skelter. Right? It's not my favorite. The guitar just irritates my ears. But it's still a great song. Obviously, the Beatles created it, but they put their own spin on it, and so I love that. So, and there's some history for me and personally with Motley Crue in that album, but another day for that. But my number one, and will probably always be my number one from this year is Pyromania, Def Leppard. You
Yes.
know, they made a career and they've made millions of dollars. Bless their hearts. They went through so much controversy and so much sadness and tragedy that they overcame. And in I don't know that they are reflected the credit that they deserve for being what they were in that time. They obviously got plenty of MTV exposure and they got plenty of radio play such as that, but because they were so good and so poppy and so driven that I think the more serious bands kind of wrote them off a little bit, and I think that is tragic because as we mentioned in the past, name a band other than them, very few have ever written back to back to back albums that
Right.
were just fantastic.
Absolutely. Well,
So
Mutt Lang is no schlub for one thing.
yeah, he
You
kind of
know,
knows what he's doing.
he really had he worked those guys, and
Yeah, yeah.
and everybody says, oh my gosh, this album is so polished, maybe it's too polished. I don't agree. I mean, he made those boys rehearse, and so those takes that you hear on this vinyl were just one take, that's it. And that's why it became so hugely popular, is because when they were touring, their songs sounded exactly like the album,
Yeah,
and everybody loved that. It's like, oh
yeah.
wow, and vice versa. They're at home, they're coming home from the concert, they put that vinyl on, and it takes them right back to that show. It was
Yep.
a really neat trick, Mutt.
Well, the funny thing is, I was listening to the radio yesterday, and I knew this. You don't think about it, but this was the first album with Phil Collin on guitar,
Yeah.
and Phil was a fan of the band. He was in another band prior to this on the High and Dry during the High and Dry days. He gets brought into the studio to help do some guitar parts, and they realize, hey, he can sing as well. And now he's the new guitarist to replace the guitar the other guy. It's phenomenal. It's a great story. They are some of the nicest guys you'll ever hear. I mean, they're still so down to earth, and they're still filling stadiums right now Yeah,
Yeah.
on their tour in Europe. It's amazing. They just considering how much they actually have been touring the last decade, people still go out to see them because,
Oh,
like you said, it brings back that childhood, that those memories. And they all and in the world of tracks and recorded music and voiceovers and stuff now that artists are using to kind of cheat the live shows, they're still live. And I love that.
I do too. And they are on my bucket list to see in concert. I have yet to see them. Out of the hundreds of shows that I've seen, I somehow have missed Def Leppard, and so they are definitely on my list.
I saw them at the Lloyd Noble Center there on the Hysteria tour.
Amazing. That's amazing. Trying to remember so Joe Elliott is such a great vocalist. Okay. I think a lot of the times people just kind of chalk them up to one of those hair bands,
Right.
but I don't put him in the same category as perhaps Sebastian Bach or Bret Michaels. I don't. And one thing that I love the Struts. The band The Struts. It's a newer rock band. Well, they've been out, I don't know, maybe a decade, but they put out an album over the pandemic, the height of it, and Luke Spiller. There's a section on one of the songs, like the songs is called "I Hate How Much I Want You," but there's a phone call where Luke Spiller is talking on the phone to Joe Elliott,
Oh, wow.
and asking him to sing vocals with him on this track. Brilliant track. I love it. Joe sounds amazing. And they're friends, they're mates. He's like, "Hey mate, it's good to talk to you." It's so cool. I love the down to earthness of somebody like Joe Elliott. He's so cool.
Sure. All right, your turn.
Okay. So I'm kind of going to go in a little bit of an order, but there's so many of these, like I said, that I have purchased in multiple media forms. First and foremost for me, Frontiers.
Of course.
Frontiers by Journey is their 8th studio album. It's the last album that had bassist Ross Valerie on there until 1996's Trial by Fire. This is when, right after Escape had some really good songs on there that were co-written with Jonathan Cain. But this one, it was like hit after hit after hit after hit.
Yeah.
Separate Ways, Faithfully, Sender My Love. The only thing that I would have really wanted to change about this album is the fact that they left 2 amazing songs off of the original, and they left off Ask the Lonely and Only the Young.
Wow.
which were both used for different movies.
Right.
But wow, this album is flawless by itself, but could you imagine just sneaking in 2 more tracks on there? It would have been unstoppable. I love this album. Number 2 for me is Cargo by Manowar. Cargo. Because first of all, they were just coming down off of Business as Usual. Okay.
Sure.
This album has, hits on there like Overkill, It's a Mistake, Dr. Heckle and Mr. Jive. A lot of people thought that, Business as Usual was their more, fine-tuned album, and perhaps it was still a mega hit.
Right.
This had, more thoughtful songs like Overkill. And it was, the themes of that song, Overkill, I think we can all relate to. It's a Mistake was an anti-war theme, anti-nuclear theme. But by and large, it's one of my favorite Men at Work albums. Let's see.
It's funny. funny you mentioned that overtone of nuclear war because this generation now cannot remember what it's like to live under that looming threat. I guess we're approaching it now, maybe a little bit, but
Sure.
that was a serious threat to
Yeah.
us
We were in
kids.
the middle of the Cold War.
Exactly, and whether it was this or U2 or I mean, boy, pick the band. There's
Right.
tons of the Def Leppard themselves, especially on the next album, Gods of War.
Yeah.
They're all talking about accept balls to the wall. A band I was going to mention as far as an album that came out later on this year in
Yeah.
1983. And that was all about the conflict and that pressure. That there people, especially in Europe, was dealing with because Europe was going to take the brunt of whatever happened anyway. So,
Right.
yeah.
Number 3 for me, as I mentioned before, was "Let's Dance" by David Bowie. I love the brilliance of Nile Rodgers and the collaboration of that. I love that Stevie Ray Vaughan was his lead guitarist on that. Stevie Ray Vaughan, like you said, he released his album that same year. An amazing talent, brilliant. Number 4, like I said, 90125 by Yes. I love it. I love that Trevor Horn was on this. Chris Squire, John Anderson.
Almost too talented to stay together as a band.
Well,
there's
exactly.
so much talent on that band.
Exactly, which comes to my next pick.
Sure. Synchronicity.
This was their last album, their last one, and they only did 5.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine the juggernaut this has to be to have, wrapped around your finger on it?
Yeah.
And it got them into so much popularity. I remember babysitting a lot in 1983, and even the adult folks that I was babysitting their kids for, everybody had a copy of this album. Everybody.
Right. 1 of 3.
And so this is one that you can't listen to those songs without seeing the video imagery in your head, wrapped around your finger. But
it did help that Sting was a pretty good looking guy.
True.
He made a very good video. So people don't really give them credit enough for this album. I mean, it was the last, so that was sad because it was their biggest. They were the biggest band in the world at that time. There was nobody more popular than the Police.
Exactly. It was, and crazy. And then it was sad that, like you mentioned, they were just too talented to stay together. Sting and Stuart Copeland had their clashes, and unfortunately it did end up, being the demise of the band. But I reaped the benefits on their reunion tour, 2000. Yes, I did. I saw the Police, the reunited Police, and it was amazing. Absolutely amazing. They didn't lose any of their magic. None of it. A little side bit about Synchronicity. I own this album twice as well. And there's 3 versions of this album, and it's when the stripes are in different order. And so I am still looking for the album where the red stripe is up top. So anybody have any tips out there? Let me know. Okay, and then last but not least.
Sure.
I cannot say enough good things about that album. Okay. First of all, it is U2's 3rd studio album. Okay. Steve Lillywhite.
Which is amazing because it's the first time I've ever heard of them at this point.
Right. And that's because that was the album that broke them into the United States having a #1 hit. And it was Sunday Bloody Sunday. I mean, who can even listen to this album without thinking about that video footage at Red Rocks? Okay. And Bono is running around the stage with that white flag. And it's amazing. It was produced by Steve Lillywhite. It did produce, the band's first international hit. Again, it had a huge boost from MTV because of the video. And I remember watching that. I did have MTV. I was fortunate enough to be one of those families, and we did have MTV. And I remember watching that video going, who is this band? I am obsessed, and so there's other ones on here, like Two Hearts Beat As One and New Year's Day. I mean, come on. It is an absolutely flawless album as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the interesting, I had to re-listen to it a little bit because I have them as my in the official list for the show, my top 5 best albums of 1983. For me, they come in at number 5 because of the power of this album. And as I was re-listening to it, musically, they have such a deft touch, and they're so adept. There's so many different types of styles of music on here, not just rock and roll. And the Edge, in the next follow-up, the Joshua Tree, which I consider the next follow-up, not all the little crap they put out in between, but the next major studio album, the Joshua Tree, the Edge gets kind of swallowed up in the whole little rhythm thing that he does with the tick, as he does. It's prevalent through the album, but on here you really see what he can do musically, and there's no reason. There's a reason why he's so respected as a guitarist.
Absolutely. You don't make a film with Jack White and Jimmy Page because you don't know what the hell you're doing.
Right, exactly. And so the interesting thing for me in my mind is that YouTube gladly picked up the flag from the Police, because by the time 1985, 86 rolled around, U2 is the biggest band in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, like for my list, like number 6 and number 5 that I have picked, I can't really pick, what one I couldn't live on a desert island without.
Right.
Stranded on an island, and I had to pick one of those two. You just have to kill me, because I could not pick either one of those albums. And like I said, they had a lot of push from MTV and the popularity of their videos. I mean, I was fascinated with Wrapped Around Your Finger off of Synchronicity, as a lot of people were. Same thing with Let's Dance, China Girl. That video, perfection.
The interesting thing is, talking about, because for my number 5, it was War, U2 for best album of the year. Number 4 was Synchronicity, so because of all the things we've been talking about right here. David Bowie does not make my top 5 best albums of that year. Okay. But the videography, most of the, a lot of the 80s videos were horrible because they didn't have an idea of how to make a video. They were learning. This was an oncoming new thing. As far as mass production music videos, there've been videos for decades prior. But
Mick Rock did a video in the 70s with the Gene Genie for David Bowie, but I don't remember a format.
Exactly, the format we created yet.
Like this music channel,
right? And so David Bowie, China Girl. It brought in sophistication and style and sex and everything, tension, the whole in this mystery, everything. And of course, back then China was still this far off mysterious land that nobody really knew much about, anyways. So the whole little Chinese ding 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 music they put in the song itself that brought on this mystique, so to speak. Because the most American kids, China was, 10,000 miles away, and, they had good noodles, Yeah. So, and that rolls into my number 3 top 5 albums of that year. And I didn't think I'd have it this high, but Genesis. For me, I had to that's why I was struggling so much putting this together this morning. I re-listened to it this morning, and, Mama is my favorite Genesis song anyways. It is so much power on this album. Phil Collins sings his heart out. And really, for a drummer, he can really sing, you know.
Oh yeah.
And that song, "Just a Job," what an amazing song! It's just, he's got this high vocal range power just driving through these choruses, which is amazing. That's all is
Yeah.
on this album. A Home by the Sea.
And Taking It All Too Hard is on that album.
Oh my gosh, you're right. And so
Hit,
it's
hit after hit.
yeah, and that's the thing about this is now their next two studio albums, and then Phil Collins' own solo albums. That's the rest of the '80s. I
Yeah.
mean, the Genesis and him they're everywhere. They're everywhere. You cannot turn around. So you can't turn on the radio dial without hearing a Phil Collins / Genesis song.
I know. Yeah.
And it's very rare that you have a band that is so cheeky and so tongue in cheek about the whole thing that the song "Illegal Alien" is on this album,
Yeah.
and whatever influence that they may decide to write it, or "I Can't Dance" in years later, or any other variety song where they kind of make fun of themselves or they kind of make fun of society around them. "Land of Confusion," right? This taking a step back away from them and saying something about what they see going on. It really is amazing that these guys they weren't just pop machines. They were
Right.
true artists. And so that leads me to my top two: "Shout at the Devil" and "Pyromania." We've talked about them enough as far as that goes, but those "Shout at the Devil" is a fantastic album and by far their best. But they that set a standard for the music coming out of LA. They had to hit a certain standard, and they set the standard really hard. And those two, that album and Pyromania being my top 10 easily, just albums of all time. So anyways, there's where I'm at.
I would definitely agree with that. That was a fantastic album, and like I said, Mutt Lange had his stamp on it. He may not be a nice person, but he sure knows what the hell he's doing in the studio.
Well, I don't know anything about the man personally. He may be a nice guy, but he's a guy that somebody always wants something from. Hey Mutt, hey Mutt, hey Mutt. And that after a while is probably kind of tiresome.
Sure. Well, awesome.
So what do you might have? What do you have on your What do you have on your top 5 list that we may have missed?
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
Gotcha.
Like influential albums.
Sure.
I think we covered it. There is one album that I think deserves an honorable mention on here, and it's Talking Heads, "Speaking in Tongues."
Yeah.
This band, they were, this little CBGB band. They had other, hit albums and whatnot. But this one, provided songs like "Burning Down the House" and "My Girlfriend Is Better." And that provided the songs for Jonathan Demme's film "Stop Making Sense," which was really innovative, really cool. It had the big suit, which David Byrne is bringing that suit out of retirement, and they are going to do "Stop Making Sense." They are.
Wow.
I'm so looking forward to seeing that. David Byrne is another one of those artists that I think that is very thoughtful. His songs, "Burning Down the House" or "And She Was," they're very poppy, very catchy. But, when you get into his lyrics, and they had these more in-depth themes. I liked "Speaking in Tongues." It was one of the bands that the kids were talking about in my English class, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, have you heard this new album? Oh, have you seen this video?" And it made me want to check it out. It made me want to investigate that a little bit more, and a few listens to it. I'm like, well, duh, of course. This is so cool.
Sure. That's funny. So two other albums at least have to be mentioned in here that influential in the '80s for artists. One, Huey Lewis Sports.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, that was a soundtrack of some that the central part of the '80s. Huey Lewis and the band and News were an amazing band. They
Yeah.
are fantastic. Hopefully, Huey figures out his inner ear problems going on, that so he can hopefully do something. If he can ever do it again, man, thanks Huey for everything, because you
Oh,
guys were amazing.
incredible.
Right, and kind of flying under the radar of in this, even though he was also one of those figures of the '80s, is John Cougar Mellencamp's album came out that
Oh,
year. So Crumbling Down and Authority Song gosh, what else?
it was Pink
Uh,
House.
Pink Houses is on that album. So once again, this is soundtrack of my life kind of thing. You were always even nowadays the songs just ring. They stand the test of time, because they truly are great music. And so that those
Every single one of these albums. I mean, I challenge anyone to go throughout the day, listen to your classic rock station, and not hear one of the songs off of one of these albums that we mentioned today. That's how huge, right, influential, and just how cool.
Well, and there's another band, there's another artist that came out this year that if it wasn't for the influence he had on me then, I may not care about him now. But Bryan Adams, Cuts Like a Knife. I mean, that was every youth dance, school dance, and that was the theme. That was the soundtrack right there.
Yeah, I have that album too. I can pull that one out because I love that album as well.
Yes.
Again, turn on the radio.
Yes, exactly.
Bryan Adams song from that album.
Which brings me to Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, Eurythmics. I mean, that the keyboard from that guy, I can't remember his name. I mean, yes, thank you. You can hear it. I can hear it now. I can hear that, him playing. It was such a background music of my teenage years, that was always running through there. And Annie Lennox and her voice. I mean, oh my gosh. I mean,
let's get real. I mean, amazing. And this album actually saved their bacon. They were dirt poor,
right?
Barely sustaining themselves.
Had just broke up as a couple.
Yeah, and they still decided to work together, and this album absolutely launched them.
Right.
And they are sustaining careers to this day because of this album. I mean, it's huge. I love 1983. I love the music that came out of that. I mean, happy 40th anniversary to these killer bands of them.
And honestly, there's a list of people we haven't even mentioned, which we probably don't have time for today. But
Madonna was on that list.
Yep, Ozzy's Bark of the Moon. I mean, there's a band that most people don't relate to as far as influential. For me, they were, though, was Crocus, and Headhunter came out this year. And let's not forget, not that anybody knew who they were, but Metallica, Kill 'Em All was released this year, and
right.
That's the band that took over the 2000s. I mean, it was, or the 90s, I should say.
Oh, exactly. Holy Diver, Dio.
Oh my gosh, Dio. Absolutely.
By ZZ Top.
Yes.
Wow. I mean,
yes.
Another band that was fueled by MTV and their videos. But I mean, you cannot listen to those songs without seeing the video, and the
spinning guitars
and the beards and the whole 9 yards.
The funny thing is the worst half of the albums came out this year. Some years would have been the best albums of that year, and these that's the power of the 1983. So
right. Mental Health by Quiet Riot, that came out. Right. I mean, that was another juggernaut. I mean, that Kevin DuBro's face in the camera of that video.
Right.
I mean, it's etched in your head. You can't listen to that song without seeing those videos, and that's cool marketing trick.
Well, what we mentioned pre-show a little bit is that people forget, for rock and roll, disco was just the worst thing ever, and disco had just got done ruling everything for a number of years, and so there's all this musical tension that is waiting to come out, and
Sure.
you're seeing it through rock and roll. But in the course, 83 Metal Health, boom, now we have the
Yeah.
LA hair band scene, which is going to take us through the decade and beat the decade,
We had this juxtaposition of these, heavy metal bands. I mean, Led Zeppelin was in the 70s. In the meantime, we had over in this corner, these Silver Mirror Ball people. Disco, and that's what I think I appreciate about the Let's Dance album, is because he kind of fused the two together.
Right.
He went from, this prog rock-ish kind of heavier sound, like Ziggy Stardust. I mean, come on. And then he fuses into this more poppy post-disco sound. I mean, it launched this thing. It was huge.
The funny thing is, I will probably finish with this thought, is that another band that has been hugely successful and may not have all the attention or get all the credit they deserved is Van Halen, right?
Yeah.
Van Halen took Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin was a hard rock band that everybody loved, but not all formats played. You didn't hear them everywhere necessarily, except on the rock stations. But Van Halen came on the scene. Now this is mainstream hard rock that was accessible in all genres. All pop stations, everybody was playing Van Halen. And the only reason I really mention this wholeheartedly, obviously, because those of us who remember know that 1984 hit the streets in 1983. And that album, was the band as under the Roth era, their last album, gave rock and roll permission to not only be hard and heavy, but to be fun and lighthearted also.
And poppy.
Again, poppy, exactly. And so now the genre, the music, rock and roll, whatever it's hair bands or just heavy metal or hard rock, they all have the same audience and voice now, which was I think largely due to Van Halen.
Right. The Stones came out with their 17th studio album this year as well, Undercover. It had that song Undercover of the Night on there, and she was hot. I mean, this was a killer year for music in general. I mean, and rock. It was just a fantastic year.
Any final thoughts from you?
No, other than,
go buy an album. I said go buy an album.
Oh, and and take your pick. I mean, all of these albums were just amazing.
All right, to our friends and fans who are watching, we appreciate you wholeheartedly. If we know you and you'd like to be part of the show, send us a message, hit us up. We'd love to have you on also. This is a show could stand some production value, but it is fun and upbeat, and we hope you guys enjoy it. So from here in Idaho and there in Oklahoma, thanks for watching Top 5. Take care, everybody.
Rock on.
3, 2, 1 out. Okay, good. Yay.
Yeah, that was awesome. So